spider can, spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
Hey everyone, so today we're going to be reviewing the original Spider-Man, and I will say I'm very excited to do this because we are going to be reviewing every single Spider-Man movie anticipating for No Way Home. So, without further ado, let's just get into it. Now, I think one of the most distinct things about this film is the cinematography compared to other movies such as the Zack Snyder movies, DCU movies, and Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. There aren't that many superhero movies with a distinct flavor to them, a distinct spark in the visuals, but this movie definitely does have that. I think the visuals are really great, very Sam Raimi-like, and you can tell Sam Raimi put a lot of effort and passion into the visuals to make them look really nice, to have these very long takes that you normally wouldn't see in a superhero movie. And a lot of superhero movies, there definitely can be quick cuts. I'm not saying this is all the time, but I'm saying that there aren't these long takes quite like in the original Spider-Man where we get to see these long swinging scenes. That might not exactly be a one shot, but it feels like a one shot take, and that's what overall matters. Another thing that is so fantastic about this movie is Peter Parker himself. I absolutely love seeing this quiet, nerdy kid become into this superhero. It's such a fascinating story. It's such a classic story, and I think it was done perfectly well with this film. I do really like The Amazing Spider-Man, but come on. The origin story part of this movie is so fantastic. It hasn't been topped, and it's almost been 20 years. And that's crazy to me that it's been 20 years, and I think very few origin stories have been able to be on the same level as this one because of the way it progresses. It progresses in this very classic Spider-Man-like way that we all know and love, but at the same time, the way Peter's character development progresses is so fantastic in this movie. Now, you could say this is Peter Parker going from being a nerd to being a superhero, but I don't think that's just the progression. I think it also could be interpreted as him from being a boy to being an adult and learning responsibility. I think that also is part of the movie, from him being a teenager that's kind of irresponsible, that doesn't exactly understand the world fully, to being a more mature, responsible adult. And I think seeing that progression, seeing his progression as maturing as a person, I think is even more interesting than him becoming a superhero. Even if you don't like the original Spider-Man, you can't deny that there is a very evident change from Peter Parker going from point A to point B, from being someone that tells Uncle Ben that he doesn't want him to be his father and stop pretending to be his father, to someone where he claims for him to be his father and accepts the fact that Uncle Ben was the man who raised him. He goes from getting angry at Uncle Ben, not understanding the true relationship he had with him and not being grateful for it, to very much accepting and understanding that Uncle Ben was the man who raised him and that in a way he is his father. And he goes from wanting to be with Mary Jane, wanting to be in a relationship with her, to accepting that he can't because of how difficult it would be and how much of a risk it would be for her. Peter Parker matures so much throughout the film and understands things so much more through when he did at the beginning of the film, becoming from a boy to a man, from becoming Peter Parker to Spider-Man at the exact same time, and we don't even realize it until we get to the end of the movie. And that is something beautiful about this film. That is something I absolutely adore about Spider-Man, is its progression for Peter Parker. Another thing I want to say about this film that I absolutely love is the build-up. We see Peter Parker slowly become over the course of the movie as it builds up, he becomes Spider-Man. And then we see Norman Osborn slowly descend into madness and become the Green Goblin. Seeing these two polar opposites go completely different paths and become completely different people is fascinating and interesting as we watch them both collide and see their differences. It's not like other superhero movies where the villain's sort of maybe already established, or we see like a reason why they're the way they are, and then they fight, and then we see mostly the main hero, and then they fight. No, we see both sides of the spectrum. We see both sides. We see both people, and we see how they become the people that they did become. And I think that's a lot more interesting and fascinating than how superhero movies nowadays are typically. Now, moving on to the negatives, I'd say one of my main ones is Norman Osborn. I think Norman Osborn, while I do love his progression and his descent into madness, I think he's just a bit too cheesy sometimes, even for a Raimi movie. I think he can be insanely over the top, way too over the top, and it just kind of comes off as funny and just stupid. Not even in like a good Raimi cheesy way, but like when in kind of a bad way, in kind of a dated way. And I think that's why I don't really like the Green Goblin that much. I think he's overall a solid villain. I just don't think he's that great of a villain because sometimes he can come off as insanely cheesy. Another problem I want to point out is the CGI. Now, the CGI isn't insanely dated, but it is kind of dated. It's not the worst thing. It doesn't bring the movie absolutely down, but the CGI definitely doesn't hold up very well in certain points in the film. I don't have a ton to elaborate with this criticism. It's just that sometimes the CGI doesn't hold up that well, but it's hard to fault it insanely amount considering it was made in 2002 and literally almost everything in this entire film holds up. Now, there are other small things I could fault it on, but overall, that is my complete opinion on the original Spider-Man. It is such a great classic, and if it weren't for this film, we wouldn't have as many superhero movies as we would today. Overall, I will give this film a 9.5 out of 10.